The sun was just rising over the skyline of the bustling city, and the golden rays slid across the surface of an opulent marble mansion that stood like a crown jewel amid a sea of lesser rooftops. This was not just any mansion. It belonged to Margaret Langford, a billionaire widow known for her sharp tongue, impeccable fashion, and rumored ruthlessness. To the world, she was elegant and untouchable. But inside that mansion, within those shimmering walls and crystal chandeliers, something far darker was brewing. The gates to the Langford estate hissed open silently at 6 a.m. And like clockwork, a slim young woman stepped inside, head bowed, her footsteps light but determined. Her name was Emily. Emily was not like other housemaids. She had never spoken a word, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. Since birth, she had been mute. People assumed that made her helpless, or worse, invisible. But that assumption would be their first mistake. Her eyes, deep and observant, caught every flicker of light, every twitch of movement, every whisper of a lie on someone's lips. And in the house of Margaret Langford, lies were as common as perfume. Emily lived alone in a small apartment above the staff quarters, barely furnished and lit by a single window. Her mornings started before dawn. She never complained, never asked for more. She cleaned in silence, served in silence, and listened to a world that rarely listened to her. The Langford mansion had 27 rooms, but there was one no one ever spoke of, Madam's private bathroom on the 3rd floor. Not even the senior staff were allowed near it. Madame Margaret herself cleaned that room, or so she claimed. But then came that morning. Emily had been wiping down the hallway chandelier near the east wing when she heard it. A crash, shattering glass, and then a faint, muffled cry. She froze. It came from Madame's bathroom. Emily looked around. No one in sight. She approached the heavy mahogany door. It was slightly ajar. Her heart pounded. Her instincts told her to turn around, but some invisible thread, pulled her in. The room inside was the most lavish space Emily had ever seen. Black marble counters, golden faucets shaped like swans, a sunken bathtub that looked like a throne. And yet, amidst all the luxury, there was chaos. Broken perfume bottles spilled expensive oils across the floor. A velvet curtain had been torn down. The scent of something sharp and chemical bit at her nose. Then she saw it. A silver case, open. Inside were small packets, roll bills, and something white and powdery. Her hands trembled. That was when she heard voices. She turned to hide behind the doorway. The voices were familiar, too familiar. One was Margaret Langford. The other was not her husband, because Mr. Langford had died 3 years ago. The voice belonged to Cameron Voss, a much younger man. Slick hair, sharp suits, a regular guest, supposedly Margaret's financial advisor. "Don't be so dramatic, Maggie," Cameron said, his tone cold. "It's just a maid. What's she going to do? Mom us to death." "She saw the powder," Margaret hissed. "She could have seen everything. Then we deal with it. You forget. People like her don't matter in this world. Poor, mute, disposable." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had to move. Slowly, she slipped out, pressing her back against the corridor wall, her thoughts racing. But as she turned the corner, she collided with someone. It was Elena, the head housekeeper, stern, loyal, and as rigid as the iron key she wore around her neck. "What are you doing up here, Emily?" Elena narrowed her eyes. Emily tried to signal, her hands shaking, pointing toward the bathroom. But Elena didn't look impressed. "Don't wander where you're not asked, especially not into Madame's wing. You don't want to lose your job, or worse." And with that, Elena marched off. Emily was left standing there, breathless, silenced not by choice but by fear. She felt in her bones. This wasn't just some drug stash. Something more sinister was happening in that house. That night, unable to sleep, she sat by her window, staring down at the glowing lights of the mansion. Her mind returned to what she had seen: the powder, the violence, the casual disregard for her life. Her fingers trembled as she sketched in her notebook, drawing the bathroom, the case, the faces of the two voices she had heard. In the corner of the drawing, she noted something odd she had seen earlier but hadn't registered fully: a small engraved emblem on the silver case. It wasn't luxury brand. It looked ancient, almost tribal. What was a billionaire socialite doing with something like that? The next morning, Margaret summoned Emily personally. That never happened. She sat at her dressing table, sipping champagne before noon. Her expression was sweet, almost maternal. "Emily, dear," she said, "you've been working very hard. Would you like a raise?" Emily blinked. Margaret smiled wider. "And perhaps a gift. Something special. I have just the thing." She rose and walked toward her walk-in closet, opening a drawer Emily had never seen. Inside was a red velvet box. She opened it slowly, and there, shimmering inside, was a diamond necklace. But Emily wasn't looking at the necklace. She was looking at the emblem engraved on the inside of the box lid, the same one as on the silver case. Something ancient, something forbidden. Margaret noticed her stare, and for a moment, just a flicker, her expression turned cold. Then she closed the box and placed it in Emily's hands. "You're a good girl," she said, almost whispering. "You don't ask questions. You keep secrets. That's why I like you." Emily nodded politely, but inside, every fiber of her being screamed. That night, Emily returned to the bathroom while the house was asleep. She snuck in with a flashlight. The broken perfume bottles had been replaced. The silver case was gone. But when she lifted the corner of the marble bathtub rug, she found something strange. A trapdoor, small, square, hidden perfectly under the tile. And it had the same emblem engraved on the handle. Her breath quickened. She reached out, hesitated, then pulled. It creaked open. A dark staircase descended beneath the mansion, and at the very bottom, a faint, pulsing red light. And something else. A voice. A whisper. Except this time, it wasn't in her head. It was real. A woman's voice. Soft, broken. "Please help me." Emily's eyes widened. She wasn't the only one trapped in that mansion. Emily's fingers trembled on the edge of the trapdoor. The cold air that seeped from below felt unnatural, as if it hadn't been touched by the sun in years. The faint red glow at the bottom of the stairwell pulsed like a heartbeat. And the voice, that soft, desperate whisper, it was real. "Please help me." Emily lowered herself onto the first step. Every creak of the old wood sounded like a scream in the dead silence of the mansion. Her flashlight flickered, and her breath misted, even though it wasn't cold. The staircase spiraled downward, deeper than she thought possible for a bathroom. This wasn't a basement, it was a chamber deliberately hidden, ancient in design. At the bottom, she found a heavy iron door with no handle, only a symbol etched deep into the metal, the same emblem from the velvet box and the silver case. She reached out and touched it. Suddenly, a voice rang out behind her. "You shouldn't be down here." Emily turned, heart pounding. It was Elena, the head housekeeper. Her eyes, usually emotionless, were now fierce with something else. Fear? Rage? "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Elena hissed, stepping forward. "Go back upstairs. Forget this place ever existed." Emily pointed frantically at the door. Try to mime what she'd heard. The voice. The plea. But Elena only shook her head. "There's no one down here. Only the past. And some doors are locked for a reason." She grabbed Emily's wrist. Her grip was stronger than it looked. "Madam thinks you're loyal. Don't make her regret that." Emily was forced up the stairs. And just as Elena pulled the trapdoor shut, Emily caught one last sound from below. A second voice, this one lower, older, and angry. Who opened the seal? Then silence. The next morning, the house was buzzing with an unnatural calm. Margaret was hosting a private dinner for some of the city's most influential elites, lawyers, investors, even a politician or two. The maids were dressed in new uniforms. The walls were draped in dark red fabric, and strange symbols, those same tribal marks, were subtly stitched into the cloth. Emily watched everything silently. Something had changed, deeply. She tried to speak to one of the newer maids, a young girl named Lila, but the girl was terrified. They told us not to talk to you, Lila whispered quickly when no one was looking. They say you hear things, that you're cursed. Emily frowned, trying to gesture for more information. But Lila shook her head violently and scurried off. Later that night, during the dinner, Emily slipped away from the kitchen and crept back toward the bathroom. The rug was gone. The trapdoor had been replaced with fresh tile, seamless, as if it had never existed. But she wasn't giving up. Not now. Back in her room, Emily pulled out the sketches she had made. The symbols, the staircase, the silver case. She circled the emblem and compared it with a small old pendant she kept hidden under her pillow, her mother's necklace, the only thing she had left from childhood. To her shock, the emblem was nearly identical. Was it possible her mother had some connection to this house? To Margaret? She needed answers, and the only person who might give them was the one who looked like her enemy, but clearly knew something deeper. Elena. The next day, Emily cornered Elena in the laundry room. She scribbled a question onto a notepad and shoved it in front of her. Who is the woman in the chamber? Elena froze. She didn't respond, just stared. Then she whispered, You remind me of her. Emily blinked. Her name was Zara. She was Margaret's younger sister. Emily's mouth opened slightly. Elena looked around, then continued. They were born into a cult. Old blood. European. Margaret escaped it. Zara didn't. But she came back 20 years ago to destroy it from the inside. But Margaret had already changed. The cult wasn't just in her past. It was her power. Emily's eyes widened. She locked her own sister underground, she scribbled. She had no choice, Elena whispered. Or maybe she did, but she chose the power instead. She believes the spirit below can give her eternal youth, wealth, control. And so, Zara was sacrificed to become the vessel. Emily gasped silently. Zara's alive, but barely. The more people Margaret feeds to the ritual, the stronger she becomes. Emily stepped back, her breath shaking. How do I free her? Elena looked torn. Then finally, she said, There's a key, a real key, hidden inside the statue in the garden. The angel holding the basin. Break the basin, but do it at night, when no one's watching. That night, with a hammer wrapped in cloth, Emily snuck into the rose garden. The angel statue stood quietly under the moonlight. Its stone face looked mournful. She struck the basin once, twice. The third time it cracked. Inside, wrapped in wax cloth, was an ancient iron key shaped like a crescent moon. Emily ran back inside, heart racing, hiding it beneath her apron. But she wasn't alone. From the shadows, someone had been watching her. Cameron Voss. The next morning, Emily was summoned again. This time, not to the dressing room, to Margaret's private study. It was dark, lit only by a single candle. Books lined the walls. Strange books, leather-bound, with no titles. Margaret sat at the far end, her expression unreadable. I've given you many chances, Emily, she said, slowly swirling a glass of red wine. But curiosity is a dangerous disease. She stood, walked toward her, and placed something on the table. Emily's sketches. Every page, every symbol, Every note. I know you've been digging, Margaret said. I know about the statue, and I know you have a key. Emily tried to back away, but behind her, Cameron blocked the door. Then Margaret leaned close and whispered, "If you unlock that door, you won't just unleash Zura. You'll unleash the thing inside her." Emily's eyes filled with fear. "She isn't what you think she is. But you'll find out." Margaret smiled cruelly. "Because tonight we're having a ritual, and you're the guest of honor." Emily stood paralyzed in Margaret's study. The weight of every word just spoken pressed down on her chest like cold iron. "You are the guest of honor." Margaret smiled, but it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was triumph, possession, control. Before Emily could react, Cameron stepped forward and pulled something from his coat pocket, a needle. Without a word, he plunged it into her neck. Emily tried to scream, but the world tilted, the candlelight blurred, and her legs gave out beneath her. Darkness swallowed her whole. She awoke not in her bedroom, but on a marble altar, her wrists bound in soft velvet rope. Around her stood a circle of robed figures, all wearing masks. Masks made of silver, each etched with symbols identical to those in the hidden chamber. Candles flickered. Strange, rhythmic chanting filled the air, deep and guttural. The scent of burning herbs, bitter and metallic, clung to everything. Margaret stood above her in a robe of blood-red silk, her face uncovered. In her hand, she held a ceremonial dagger, its hilt shaped like a serpent. Emily tried to move, to scream, to fight, but whatever had been injected into her still dulled her muscles. Her thoughts, however, were sharp. Terrified, but sharp. Margaret raised the dagger. "She is the key," she said aloud, addressing the massed assembly. "Born of the same bloodline as Zara. She carries the dormant power in her veins." There was a collective murmur. Approval. Excitement. "But she is not the sacrifice," Margaret continued. "She is the vessel." Suddenly, a rumble shook the ground. The floor beneath the altar began to split open, revealing a staircase of bone-white stone. From below came a sound that no human throat could produce. A wailing howl, not of pain, but of hunger. And then Zara rose. Her appearance was shocking. Not aged, not monstrous, but beautiful, ethereal. Her skin glowed faintly, her eyes pitch black. Her long hair floated as if underwater. Yet there was something wrong, something unhuman. Zara's gaze locked onto Emily's. She spoke in a voice like shattered glass. "Sister of my blood, daughter of betrayal, come to me." Margaret gestured, and the ropes binding Emily were cut. Emily sat up, dizzy but free. "You were chosen for this," Margaret said softly. "You're her rebirth. She'll enter you, and through that union, I will live forever." But Emily, still mute, still trembling, reached into her apron. The key. She held it high. Zara's eyes flared with sudden light. "No!" Zara shrieked, not in fear, but desperation. Emily threw the key to the ground and stomped on it. It snapped in half. The reaction was instant. The floor cracked. The candles blew out. The masked figure screamed. Zara let out a scream so piercing, glass shattered throughout the chamber. A vortex of wind whipped around the altar. The circle of power was broken. And then Elena burst in, holding a silver mirror. "Emily," she shouted. "Look!" She angled the mirror toward Zara. Zara caught her reflection and screamed. Her face twisted, contorted. Not human. A demon. Margaret lunged at Elena, but Cameron stopped her. For the first time, his mask was off, and his eyes were filled with horror. He whispered, "You said it would bring you power. Not this." Margaret spat. "She's my sister. She was mine to control." But it was too late. Zara turned to her. With a flick of her hand, Margaret was lifted off the floor, and thrown into the pit below. The wind died. The lights returned. Zara looked at Emily one last time and whispered, "Thank you." Then she, too, vanished, leaving only a feather of white hair behind. Hours passed. The mansion was evacuated. Police and investigators came. The masked cultists had fled. Margaret's body was never recovered. Cameron disappeared. Elena handed Emily a note, written in a familiar handwriting. "You broke the cycle. My sister couldn't, but you did. The voice you lost will return when you no longer needed to scream." 1 week later, Emily stood in a field of white roses, the sun warming her face. She was far from the mansion now, in a quiet village by the sea. A little girl approached her, offering a flower. Emily took it and whispered, "Thank you." The little girl gasped. "You can talk." Emily smiled softly. Her voice had returned, but far away beneath the ruins of the estate, a heartbeat still echoed. Slow, cold, waiting. 2 years later, Emily stood on the steps of the Everspring orphanage, her hands full of books, her heart full of quiet strength. She had rebuilt her life, not as a maid, but as a teacher, a storyteller, a guardian for the voiceless. No one here knew her past, only that she once couldn't speak, and now spoke with a kindness deeper than words. But some nights, when the wind howled just right, she'd remember the mansion, the trapdoor, the silver masks, and Zara's eyes. Then one day a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a black and white photograph of a young Margaret and a young Zara, smiling on a sunlit beach. On the back, a single sentence: "Not everything buried should stay forgotten." And below that, a symbol, the same emblem, but this time it was split in two as if broken. Emily froze, because the last time she saw that symbol broken, it had unleashed something beneath the earth. That night, sleep came uneasily. Dreams returned, not of the mansion, but of a house in the woods far older. Stone walls, creaking floors, and a single mirror at the top of the stairs. In the mirror, a reflection that wasn't hers. It wore her face, but smiled with Zara's teeth. She awoke sweating, shaken, and the feather Zara had left behind, once white, was now gray. Emily knew what it meant. The ritual had been interrupted, not destroyed. Zara had been freed from her prison, but the demon inside her had never been cast out. It was looking for a new vessel, and it had tasted Emily's blood. She traveled east, following the clues hidden in the photo, the shoreline, the cliffs, the shape of the trees. And eventually, she found it. The hollow house, old, silent, covered in vines, yet untouched by time. Inside, the air was thick with whispers. The walls seemed to breathe. She climbed the stairs one by one. At the top, the mirror. It was cracked. Emily stepped forward and saw herself. But in the reflection, her eyes were black. "You came back," the reflection whispered, then reached out. But Emily didn't flinch. She raised the pendant, her mother's, the same one that matched the cult's emblem, and pressed it against the glass. The mirror screamed, not shattered, shattered back. Every memory, every ritual, every soul claimed in Margaret's name returned to the void behind the glass. The reflection vanished. The mirror turned to dust, and the house began to collapse. Emily barely escaped the ruins. As dawn broke over the trees, she stood alone in the clearing. And finally she understood. She was not the vessel. She was the seal, the one born not to carry evil, but to end it. 5 years later, Emily published a book, The Mute and the Mirror, A True Story. It became a bestseller. Critics called it fantasy. Psychologists called it metaphor. But those who had seen, those who had survived Margaret's mansion, they knew the truth. And in a quiet town by the coast, an old woman named Elena smiled as she read the final page. Because the last line was meant for her. Sometimes the one who cannot speak is the only one who can listen to what no one dares to hear. But in a dark corner of an abandoned mansion, a single silver mask still sat on a velvet pillow, untouched, unclaimed, waiting. Years passed. The mansion had long been demolished. The land was sold to a developer who planned to build a luxury resort. But every time construction began, something went wrong. Workers complained of hearing footsteps on floors that didn't exist, voices whispering beneath the soil, and once a surveyor vanished, leaving behind only a feather, white tinged with gray. Eventually, the project was abandoned. Locals called it the Quiet Curse. They avoided the area, except for one girl. Her name was Lena, 17, mute since birth. She had read Emily's book dozens of times. Her foster mother said it was fiction, but Lena knew. The feeling in her chest when she passed the place wasn't fear. It was recognition. One afternoon, as the sun bled red over the horizon, Lena walked through the remains of the forest. She followed no map, only a tug in her soul, until she found it, a clearing, and in the center, the mask. Still there, still waiting. Lena bent down. Her fingers brushed the cold silver. It was warm. Suddenly, her head jerked back, eyes wide, mouth agape in a silent scream. Visions flooded in. Margaret, Zara, Emily, the mirror, the symbol, the whisper, seal her or serve her. Lena dropped the mask, but it didn't fall. It floated, then shattered midair into 1,000 feathers. Lena stood. A voice, her voice, finally escaped her lips. It ends now. And somewhere far away, sitting by the ocean, Emily turned sharply toward the waves, eyes brimming with knowing tears. She smiled, because she heard it. Sometimes courage doesn't shout. Sometimes it simply whispers and finally gets heard.